I used to think that love was supposed to be easy. You meet someone, fall in love, and then live happily ever after, right? That was the story I had in my mind. I mean, that's what the movies tell you, what your parents tell you, what society tells you. But I didn't realize how naive I was until I found myself standing in front of my biggest decision yet, one that I never saw coming. You see, for most of my life, I believed in the idea of a perfect relationship. I thought that love was a destination, something you could work towards and eventually achieve. There was this bubble I lived in, a bubble where everything would just click into place if you found the right person and worked hard enough. I thought that love meant never giving up, sticking together no matter what, and making it through every challenge as a team. I thought I had found that person. Her name was Laura. We had been together for 5 years. 5 years of what I thought was a perfect relationship. We met in college, and from the moment we started talking, it felt like everything just fit. We had the same sense of humor, the same values, the same interests. We were the perfect match, or so I believed. Everyone around us thought so too. Friends, family, they all thought we were meant to be. In the early years, everything felt so easy. We moved in together, started building our lives side by side. Every day felt like an adventure. I remember waking up next to Laura, thinking to myself, this is it. This is what love is supposed to be. We're in it for the long haul. The world outside felt distant, like nothing else mattered except the two of us. I had convinced myself that as long as we were together, everything would work out. The future seemed like a sure thing. We'd get married, have kids, and grow old together, like in the fairy tales. But as time passed, cracks started to appear. Small ones at first. Little things that didn't quite line up with my idealized vision of love. She'd get upset over things that I didn't see as a big deal, or I'd get frustrated with her over stuff that seemed trivial. At first, I chalked it up to normal relationship stuff. Everyone argues, right? Everyone has disagreements. We were both busy with our careers, adjusting to adult life. Surely, this was just part of the growing pains that came with a long-term relationship. I kept telling myself that love was about weathering the storms, sticking it out, and finding ways to make it work. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I realized something was missing. There was a feeling in the air that I couldn't quite pinpoint, but it was there, a sense of growing distance between us. It wasn't anything drastic, nothing that anyone else would have noticed. But I started to feel it in the way we interacted. The laughter didn't come as easily anymore. The late-night talks turned into brief exchanges before bed. And most telling of all, the spark, what I had once believed to be the defining characteristic of love, started to fade. I tried to ignore it. I pushed through. I thought to myself, it's just a phase. Maybe it was a result of stress at work or the mundane routine of life. Maybe I wasn't being as attentive as I should have been. I convinced myself that I just needed to try harder, to fight for the relationship, to make more effort to reconnect. But deep down, I started to question everything I had once believed about love. What if it wasn't just about working hard and pushing through the tough times? What if love wasn't always enough to keep a relationship going? What if I had been living in a bubble all this time, thinking that love would just fix everything, when maybe it wasn't the right love at all? And that's when the fear set in. The fear of facing the truth. The fear of realizing that love wasn't always the answer. I began to wonder if my belief in love had been too idealistic. What if love couldn't solve everything? What if we weren't meant to be, despite everything we had shared? The more I thought about it, the more I began to question whether my idealized vision of love had blinded me to the reality of what was actually happening in my relationship. I had been so focused on the happily ever after that I had failed to notice the slow unraveling of our connection. For the first time, I realized something that scared me more than anything else. Maybe we weren't the perfect match after all. Maybe love wasn't the cure-all that I had once believed it to be. When I first met Laura, everything seemed perfect. She was smart, funny, and beautiful. I remember thinking that this was it, the kind of love you read about in books. We had plans, dreams for the future. We talked about our ideal lives together. I thought we were on the same page. It was exciting. The possibilities seemed endless. At first, it was everything I had hoped for. We laughed together, we shared intimate moments, and I truly believed we were building something special. I thought love was supposed to feel like this, easy, effortless, something that flows naturally when you find the right person. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first. Little things, like the silence that started creeping into our conversations. The awkward pauses. The way we didn't seem to have as much to say to each other anymore. It wasn't that we fought. No, it was worse than that. We just drifted. And I didn't know why. I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch. Everyone goes through tough times in relationships, right? Maybe it was work stress, or maybe we were just worn out from the routine. But as time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The connection I once felt so strongly wasn't there anymore. It was like we were living parallel lives instead of together. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I couldn't pretend anymore that everything was fine. The relationship that once felt so effortless was now a constant effort. And that was when I realized, maybe love isn't supposed to be that easy. Maybe love isn't about just holding on when everything else starts to fall apart. Maybe it's about knowing when to let go, even if it hurts. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I could feel it in my gut. Something was missing. We weren't in sync anymore. It wasn't that I didn't care about Laura anymore, far from it. I still loved her, but the love I felt for her was different. It wasn't the love I thought I would always have. And that hurt more than anything. It's funny how dreams can sometimes turn into nightmares when the reality of a situation hits. I kept thinking about what we had, about the potential we had together. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't enough anymore. The truth was, we had both changed. And what I once thought would last forever wasn't. I started to question everything. Was I just imagining things, or had things really changed? It was easy to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was just overthinking it. But then the doubts kept creeping in. And the more I tried to ignore them, the stronger they became. I feared that maybe I was falling out of love. The thought terrified me. I had always believed that love was supposed to be something solid, something you could count on. But now, it felt like I was drifting away, and I had no idea how to stop it. I didn't want to hurt Laura. She deserved better than someone who was losing interest. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't the same person I was when we first got together. Something had shifted, and I couldn't put the pieces back together. I wondered if I was just scared of change. Maybe I was afraid of the unknown, afraid of what life would be like if I took that first step toward ending things. The thought of breaking up was so overwhelming. What if I was making a mistake? What if I was throwing away something that could still be fixed if I just tried harder? I kept replaying all the good moments in my head, the laughs, the love, the connection we once had, and I couldn't understand how it had slipped away. But there was another part of me, the part one didn't want to admit existed, that wondered if things weren't going to get any better. Maybe this was just who we had become. Maybe we had outgrown each other, and that's why everything felt so off. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of more, staying and pretending everything was fine or facing the truth and letting go. I started to question my own feelings. Was I just scared of being alone? Had I let fear guide my decisions all along? I thought I loved Laura, but now I wasn't even sure what love meant anymore. Was it just about comfort? About not wanting to hurt the other person? Was it about convenience? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I tried to ignore the doubts, the more I realized that they were only getting louder. And deep down, I knew I had to face them. I had to confront my fears. Because if I didn't, I'd keep living in this uncomfortable limbo, stuck between the past and the future. The truth was, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was scared of what would happen if I broke up with Laura, but I was also scared of what would happen if I didn't. My heart was torn, and it was only getting harder to keep pretending that everything was okay. The longer I stayed in the relationship, the more I felt like I was suffocating. Every day felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to change. But nothing did. It wasn't that Laura was doing anything wrong, it wasn't about her. It was about me. I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't being true to myself. I was stuck in this cycle of pretending that everything was okay when, deep down, I knew it wasn't. I started feeling guilty, like I was betraying her somehow. She deserved someone who was fully present, someone who could give her the love and attention she needed. But I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't even know if I could be that person. I kept telling myself that maybe if I stuck it out, it would get better. Maybe if I just tried harder, things would go back to how they were when we first met. But the more I tried, the more I felt like I was losing myself in the process. Every time I saw her, I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to keep pretending. And the worst part was, she didn't even know what I was going through. She didn't know how much I was struggling to make sense of my own feelings. It was painful to realize that I was going through something so deep, and I wasn't being honest with her. I wasn't being honest with myself either. I started to notice the small things, like the way we didn't laugh the same way anymore, or how our conversations felt forced. It was like we were both walking around with this invisible wall between us, and no matter how much we tried to break it down, it only seemed to grow taller. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to believe that we could work through this, but every day it became harder to ignore that we were drifting further apart. I couldn't keep living like this. The emotional weight of pretending to be happy was taking its toll. I felt disconnected from everything, from Laura, from myself, from my own dreams. It felt like I was sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of something that wasn't even real anymore. And then there was the fear that if I let go, I might never find anything like this again. That maybe I was throwing away the best thing I'd ever had. The thought of being alone terrified me. But at the same time, I realized I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I wasn't truly present. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. I had to make a decision. But every option seemed to come with its own pain. If I stayed, I'd be miserable. If I left, I'd break Laura's heart. It felt like there was no right answer, just two paths, each leading to more hurt. I couldn't keep living like this. The constant pressure, the tension, the feeling that I was just going through the motions, it was breaking me. I woke up every day knowing I had to make a decision, but the decision I feared most was the one I had been putting off for months, ending it with Laura. The thought of saying those words, of telling her that I wasn't happy anymore, terrified me. How do you look someone in the eye and tell them that you're no longer in love with them? How do you shatter someone's world when all you've ever wanted to do is protect them? But I knew it wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me. Every time we had a conversation, it felt like I was lying about how I felt, about where we were going. I couldn't do it anymore. But I didn't know how to make it stop. I didn't know how to face her and break her heart. One night, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the clock, dreading the moment when she'd come home from work. I thought, maybe I can just wait until tomorrow. Maybe I can put it off for one more day. But I knew that wasn't going to help. Tomorrow would come, and I'd still be in the same place, stuck. When she walked through the door, I felt this sudden heaviness in my chest. It was like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her anymore. I looked at her and knew that this conversation couldn't wait any longer. She could tell something was off, and I could see it in her eyes, the worry, the confusion, the unspoken questions. I took a deep breath and said the words I never thought I'd have to say. Laura, we need to talk. I saw the fear in her eyes, and my heart broke for her. But I knew it was time. Time to let go. Time to stop pretending. The conversation that followed was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We talked about everything, our past, our dreams, how we got here. I told her how I felt, how the connection we once had was gone, how I didn't know how to fix it. It was messy. It was painful. And it hurt more than I thought possible. But as we spoke, something shifted. I realized that breaking up wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about acknowledging that we had both changed, that we weren't the same people we had been when we started. And sometimes, change means that two people have to go their separate ways to grow. I could see the pain in her eyes, but I also saw something else, a kind of relief. It wasn't that she wanted it to end, but she could feel it too. She could feel the distance, the space that had grown between us. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would hold. But in that moment, I knew that this was the only way forward. We both needed to heal, to find ourselves again. I wasn't abandoning her. I was giving her the chance to be who she truly was, just as I needed to do for myself. The days after the breakup were some of the hardest I've ever faced. At first, I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because, for the first time in months, I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't forcing myself to stay in something that didn't feel right. But then, the guilt set in. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Did I do the right thing? Could I have tried harder? Was I selfish for walking away when things got tough? I spent a lot of time alone in those first few weeks. There were days when I felt completely numb, just going through the motions of everyday life, trying to make sense of everything. And then there were days when the emotions hit me hard, like a tidal wave that came out of nowhere. I missed Laura. I missed the good times, the connection we had, the feeling that we were building something together. It wasn't that I regretted the breakup, but I couldn't help but mourn what we had lost. I found myself questioning everything. Had I really loved her? Was this just a part of growing up, realizing that sometimes love isn't enough to make a relationship work? Or was I just afraid of being vulnerable? Afraid of opening myself up fully again? These questions kept me up at night, and there were times when I thought I was going crazy, trapped in my own head, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But as the days passed, something started to shift. I started to feel like myself again. For the first time in a long time, I was able to focus on my own life, my own needs, without worrying about someone else's. It wasn't that I didn't care about Laura. It was just that, for the first time in months, I was able to think about who I was outside of the relationship. I had forgotten what that felt like. I started rediscovering parts of myself I had neglected. I went for long walks by myself, something I hadn't done in a while. I started working on projects I had put off, hobbies I had abandoned. I even made plans to travel, something I had always wanted to do but never felt like I had the time for. And then, one evening, I found myself sitting on the porch, thinking about everything that had happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just at peace. I realized that the breakup wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of something new. It was the chance for both of us to grow, to become the people we were meant to be. I knew that Laura and I would both be okay. We'd find our way separately, and maybe, someday, our paths would cross again. But for now, I understood that this was how it had to be. The hardest part of the whole thing wasn't walking away. It was realizing that love sometimes means letting go. I had been holding on because I thought that was what love required. But now, I understood that true love isn't about holding on when things are falling apart. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to let go and trusting that both people will find their way. As the weeks went by, I started to notice something I hadn't expected. I was changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The person I was before the breakup was someone who was constantly worried, constantly afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of disappointing people. But now, I was learning to live without that constant fear hanging over me. I started trusting myself more. I realized that, for so long, I had been letting the fear of making mistakes dictate my life. I was so focused on doing the right thing for everyone else that I had lost sight of what I needed. But now, it felt like I was finally listening to myself, something I had forgotten how to do in the chaos of the relationship. I began to think about what I really wanted, not just in love, but in life. What was it that I wanted to pursue? What were my goals, my passions? For the first time in a long time, I had the space to answer those questions honestly. And you know what? It felt liberating. I started setting goals for myself again, things I had put off for years, things I had brushed aside because I thought they were too selfish or impractical. I started working on myself physically, too. I'd been neglecting my health for far too long. I joined a gym and started getting back into shape, something that felt good for my body and my mind. It was like I was taking back control of my life, piece by piece. And each small change felt like I was regaining a part of myself that had been buried under the weight of the relationship. But then, something unexpected happened. About 2 months after the breakup, Laura and I ran into each other at a coffee shop. At first, I felt that familiar anxiety. What would we say? Would it be awkward? Would I still feel the same? But when I saw her, something clicked. I didn't feel sadness or guilt. I didn't feel like I had to apologize or explain myself. Instead, I felt peace. We talked for a while, catching up on life, and I realized how much we had both grown. She was happier too. It was clear she had found her own path, and so had I. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There were no grand gestures or sweeping confessions. It was just two people who had been through something difficult and had come out stronger on the other side. We shared a laugh, exchanged a few stories, and then parted ways with a sense of mutual respect. There were no hard feelings, no regrets. Just a quiet understanding that we were both better off now. That moment with Laura taught me something important. Sometimes, relationships don't work out, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you've failed. It doesn't mean you're destined to be alone forever. Sometimes it means you've outgrown each other, and that's a part of life. It was a moment of clarity. I had been afraid of the unknown, of what would happen if I let go. But now, I could see that there was so much more out there for me. There were new experiences to have, new people to meet, and most importantly, a new version of myself to discover. The unexpected change wasn't just about my life without Laura. It was about realizing that I was capable of handling change, of handling discomfort, and of moving forward, even when I was scared. The real shift, though, happened when I started focusing on my own happiness, rather than relying on someone else to give it to me. I had spent so much of my life looking for validation in others, trying to mold myself into what I thought people wanted me to be. But now, I was learning to validate myself. I didn't need approval from anyone. I didn't need to depend on anyone to feel like I was enough. It wasn't just about self-love in the romantic sense, but in every sense. I had learned to appreciate who I was, flaws and all. I had learned that I wasn't defined by any one relationship, any one decision, or any one chapter in my life. I was my own person, capable of creating the life I wanted for myself. Whether that meant having a relationship or not, and that confidence carried over into everything. At work, I began taking risks I had never taken before, whether it was pitching new ideas, taking on projects outside my comfort zone, or standing up for myself when I needed to. I began to feel empowered in ways I hadn't imagined. I also realized that I had never really given myself the chance to thrive before. I had been so caught up in the idea of a relationship and what it should look like that I forgot to build my own life, to make it mine. Now, I was doing just that. I was creating something uniquely mine, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or vision for me. It felt like a rebirth. I wasn't just healing from a breakup, I was rediscovering who I was meant to be. And that person was strong, capable, and worthy of the life I was now creating. As the months passed, something unexpected started to happen. I wasn't looking for love, not actively anyway. I was still focused on myself, on building the life I wanted. But then, one evening, I met someone who changed everything. It happened at a friend's party. I wasn't even planning on going, to be honest. I had been feeling a bit tired, but my buddy insisted. I walked in, and that's when I saw her. Her name was Emily. There was something about her presence, warm, grounded, and easy to talk to, that caught me off guard. We hit it off almost immediately, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited by the possibility of getting to know someone. We spent the evening talking, laughing, and sharing stories. It wasn't like any of my past relationships. With Emily, I didn't feel like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. I didn't feel the need to impress her or prove anything. I was just myself. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The most surprising thing was how naturally everything flowed between us. It didn't feel forced. It wasn't about creating an ideal image or pretending to be perfect. We simply enjoyed each other's company and let things develop at their own pace. There were no expectations, no pressures. It just felt right. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I spent more time together. I started to realize that this felt different from anything I had experienced before. I had been so afraid of starting over, of opening myself up again after everything with Laura. But now, I understood that love wasn't something that had to happen all at once. It didn't need to be an overwhelming rush of emotions. Love, I realized, could be simple. It could be slow, steady, and grow over time. As we spent more time together, I could feel myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't afraid of getting hurt anymore. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes. I had learned to trust myself, and now I was learning to trust someone else again. There was no rush. There was no pressure to make it work. We were just two people enjoying each other's company, each of us bringing our own lives to the table, and together, creating something new. I'd learned so much over the past few months. I had learned that sometimes, love comes when you're least expecting it. It doesn't come with grand declarations or fireworks. It comes quietly, patiently, when you're ready to be open to it. And most importantly, I had learned that love isn't something that needs to be chased or forced. It's something that grows naturally when the right people meet at the right time. The best part was that I didn't need anyone else to validate me anymore. I was already whole. I had already learned to love myself. So when Emily and I finally decided to take things to the next level, it wasn't because I was looking for someone to complete me. It was because I wanted to share my life with someone who was equally whole, and who valued me for exactly who I was.